create STEM experiences for a more diverse student population. Our future depends on the creativity and innovation of our amazing students who challenge themselves to solve real problems. And this talk has a plethora of resources, tools, and the techniques to support educators and students in this noble endeavor by leveraging technology and building community resources with higher education institutions, nonprofits, and business. So let's welcome Daniela. It's all yours.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank you, Tyrone, for your words and just the idea of everything that you stated. I completely agree with and will resonate in my talk about the ideas that really building partnerships, not just with companies or with peers, but also with students, really is the most important thing. I've had guest speakers this week. I just got out of a previous conference that was organized in my local community, and the same theme is coming up, which is exactly what you said, the idea of mentorship, of partnerships, of people. Yes, content. I love chemistry. Chemistry is my passion, but it is not what is going to reach my students. It is that personal connection. It is showing them that there are people like them that are successful and that people believe in them. So
Absolutely.
I really appreciate what you said and wholeheartedly agree with it. And I'm glad to hear someone else say it. So I
Thank you
just
so
wanted to
much. I
say thank
appreciate
you.
that.
And I
Thank you.
already was stalking your LinkedIn.
Oh
So
yeah, please, please do. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. And Ryan, I think I saw you're from Chaminade, which I graduated from Alamany. So in some ways, we're like rivals way back from high school. But I know that Chaminade has a fantastic academic program. Um, and so I'm sorry that I came in late to the talk, but like I said, I was just coming off a different one that's in my local community. So I will go ahead and get started. And well, you can see my background. I graduated from UCLA with a degree in psychobiology, and then I got my master's degree and my credential to teach at Stanford. So I've been in Southern California and Northern California, and I've taught in both areas. And so I have kind of a breadth of experience, at least in California. So before I begin learning, want to talking about what's going on in my classroom and just in terms of the struggles with distance learning, especially right now. And that's why it's so wonderful to see people that are interested in supporting students, because a social and emotional learning right now is a key component in distance learning because students are struggling. We have the normal stress of every day, how do I get into college? To the idea of, how do I learn in this new format with all that's going on in my background? So the idea of recognizing what's going on just from an emotional perspective is extremely important and is actually one of the focuses in my school and in many schools as it should be. So I'm going to be modeling some of these practices in my talk as we go through the less than an hour. So I have one of the things that I hope teachers have access to is different ways to engage students. And one of the all the resources that I show today will be free. One of them that I think is super simple is, if you've never used it before, is Poll Everywhere. And Poll Everywhere is a great way to get, you can use cell phones or you can go to a website. For students, obviously, they always have their phone in their hand. And just a way to make sure they're awake and engaged and just to get a quick feel of how things are going. So if you're on the talk and you wanted to text 22333, Daniella, right there, 221, and answer this question, what helped you get through this week? It's always interesting to see the responses. Last weekend, I did a talk with UCLA, and I put this up, and I was shocked at what some of the responses were. They were amusing, to say the least. So if you have a chance, it would be great to put in what got you through this week, because I think that's how we are all living right now, is week to week, with COVID and the different ways that that's affecting us professionally and our students as well. So I know it takes a minute to get on there and to put something in, and I will do the same because we are a small group. Just to get the experience of what it's like to use that, or since it's just us, if you want to just unmute and say, hey, what helped you get through this week? It is kind of cool to see the word cloud because this is set up to form a word cloud so that things get bigger or smaller based on how many responses you get. And as you might imagine, the largest response from adults is usually coffee. That always pops up as the biggest word, which is pretty standard. But I was surprised that last week, what popped up from my talk at UCLA was bananas. And I was like, wow, these are a bunch of healthy people. Bananas, that's great. The third big word that popped up was walks, which I think is fantastic. Because given that we're connected to doing a lot of Zooms and computer time and sitting around, it's fantastic to see that some people were getting outside and walking. So this is just a tool you can use. And like I said, you can set it up in different ways. This one is set up to appear as a word cloud, and I will text myself just so that you can see what it looks like. And it should pop up with the question. And let me know if it's not working, because it should be. Okay, and so I'm gonna put what gets me through. And so when someone puts in something, it pops up. And then if someone also puts that same thing, it will make the word bigger or smaller. So that's kind of how it works, and it forms a word cloud. So it's just a really simple way to get people to engage and to see where they're at. Okay, so we'll move on now. Oh, wait, did someone put in something else? Students. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so your students got you through this week. That's fantastic. So just a quick background on myself. I am a first generation college student. So I was the first one in my family to go to college. As soon as I graduated from college, I knew I wanted to teach because of an experience I actually had with a job that I got while I was at UCLA. I needed to earn some money. And so I looked at the job board and I was like, oh, they need a tutor at a high school, a local high school, Santa Monica High School. So I went there and I fell in love with teaching. I had no intention of being a high school teacher. I was going to look at going into research, but I just felt at home. So ever since then, I've been teaching in public high school, and traditional public high schools, 36 students per class, typical California class sizes. I've been teaching for 25 years, and I've been at 5 different public high schools. So if you do the math on that, that's 4,500 students. So in my career, I have interacted and hopefully had some small measure of impact on 4,500 students. Currently, I'm a chemistry and nanoscience teacher at Valencia High School here in Southern California. But when I first started teaching, I also taught biology. So one of the things that I noticed when I was at Valencia, I've been there for about 12 years. And my first couple of years, I noticed something as a chemistry teacher, because chemistry was sort of the last required science, and then students could decide to either take it or take more science or not take science. And what I noticed is certain kids were left out of taking more science classes. There was particular kids that just said, nah, that's not for me, or they tried it and then they would come back to me like crying, saying I tried, this was not supportive, they made them feel dumb, and just different things and I knew these students, I knew that they should be successful in the next step. So that got my mind going about, okay, what can I do to help address this problem? Because this is not okay. And most of the time, those students that came to me were, number one, female, and number two, tended to be from underrepresented groups. So that's kind of what started my journey. And it was serendipitous that I looked in my alumni magazine and saw this thing for California Nanoscience Institute teacher workshops. And I was like, what's nanoscience? And then what attracted me was free stuff, as does all teachers. So I signed up, I went on a Saturday, drove out to UCLA, and I like to say that Saturday changed my life, because I was absolutely addicted to this concept of nanoscience. Immediately, I recognized its value. And I just, as a learner, I was like, this is so cool. And I was just fully engaged. So from this experience, I ended up wiggling my way into being a teacher facilitator with them. They just couldn't get rid of me. And so I started to build a network, and I got to have some really interesting experiences. I participated in something called a research education for teachers, which I had never heard of before. Through my network at UCLA, I applied and got it through UCSB. And this was way back, probably about 10 years ago. And with the something called the NNIN, which no longer exists because it was the National Nanotechnology Infrastructure, and they've transitioned into something new. I got the experience for the very first time to work in a clean room, which I had never done before. And it was just an amazing transformative experience for me as a learner, and put me back in that position of, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know what's happening. And I had to struggle, and I had to work with my mentor, who was a graduate student. And it was an amazing experience. So much so that just recently, this past year, I decided to apply again, and I'm doing an RET with the MRL at UCSB, which I'll talk about a little bit later, the Materials Research Lab. But I have been building a network for the last 10 years of amazing people that are supportive of STEM education. So from these experiences, I decided I was a woman on a mission, and I wanted to enhance STEM learning, and I wanted to promote diversity and equity. And in order to do that, just intuitively, I was like, okay, I got to build a community. I want learners to feel empowered, promoting learner agency. And really, I wanted to model the research process, because I had forgotten, it'd been so long since I'd been in college, I forgot about how engaging that process was of starting something and not knowing exactly where you were going to go. So I took all my experiences and developed something called an honors nanoscience class, which I wrote the curriculum for and got UC approved as a 5-point honors class, which was very important because I wanted to give kids the same access and kind of notability as they would taking an AP class, which is what this class does. And it is UC approved because UC drives everything in California. And at the same time, I also worked with some students to start something called the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Club, which works kind of hand in hand with the nanoscience class. And I'll be talking about that as well. So the Honors Nanoscience class at VHS, which is on the books, so any school in California could offer this. It was based on something called the Big Ideas of Nanoscale Science and Engineering, which was a fantastic NSTA book. And I took that book, my experience at UCLA and my RET experience at NIN, and I wrote the curriculum, which consists of 6 modules. And the most important part about this is that it's looking at novel materials, looking at solving today's problems. And that's what engaged kids. We would talk about it as the science of tomorrow, not the science in the history books, because that's not engaging to students nowadays. They want to know what's next. They want to help solve problems. They want to be engaged. And just the traditional, textbook for AP chemistry wasn't doing it for a large portion of students. So over the last about 10 years, this program has founded 6 community partners, worked with over 50 mentors, entered 30 competitions, had students develop 125 projects. I've gotten 10 grants and impacted over 300 students directly taking the course. So I just wanted to talk just briefly about some of the things that make the course engaging. And I love this picture because this is my first guest speaker. He was a PhD candidate at UCLA. And these 2 young ladies here were in my original first nanoscience class. And this young lady here currently is a grad student at Cornell in materials engineering, working on her PhD. We still talk. And this young lady here is an electrical engineer at Oracle. And these 2 were part of my first class, and they are just wonderful young women who have grown into and are really pursuing fantastic careers in STEM. And so I love that picture because it reminds me of that. I talk about failure a lot in my class. One of the things that students have trouble with is that idea of failure and resilience. And this is really something that is so important when you're working with communities that are afraid of failure. And that idea that incorporating failure is part of the learning process, and that failure can be fun. Failure is how you learn. If you haven't failed, you really haven't tried to learn something new. So we do lots of different activities from super basic stuff. This is looking at force and investigating something using just a basic force meter. And they built prototype models for the gecko. And that's something that is super, super simple to do in any classroom. And it was a design your own sort of activity. We used our local resources at our community college, and I worked with a professor there who gave us access to some of the equipment in her lab, such as a really nice digital microscope. She also had an STM and some other really cool things that we got to use. Field trips to UCLA and their Nanosystem Institute have been one of the benefits of me working with UCLA. And then this is a solar cell, a dye-sensitized solar cell that my students build every year. That's one of the free kits that UCLA gives away. So these are just kind of just a smattering of some of the things we do, from something very basic that anyone can do to something that, hey, if you go and get these materials from UCLA, you get them for free. And then just exploring your resources. So one of the key parts of the course is the second semester research project, which students have the option, they're not required, to enter competitions. And over the years, the number of competitions that they have available to them have grown from various ones. And we have won different competitions and brought in some money to the program, which has helped sustain the program. So this picture down here is from 2 years ago, where students won $1,000 from a UCLA nanovation competition, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. This group up here just won this competition first place last year, actually, and brought $2,000 to our school. These students participated in a local competition that was focused on sustainability, and they won Amazon gift cards. And this group down here participated in an international competition dealing with biomimicry, and they did not win the competition they were in, but it was a fantastic experience. And they actually just entered a different competition this year using that same work, and they won first place. So for students to understand how these projects can be used in multiple ways and provide them with really interesting experiences that are really up to them to choose. So these are topics that they chose to pursue, and they had to construct from the ground up. So it's a great experience in terms of project management and also just learning how to come up with an idea. So a key part, no matter what they do, no matter what their project is, no matter whether or not they decide to enter a competition, they do have to present at our local public school. And I invite people from all over our local community, as well as I've made some contacts where we have mentors from Lockheed Martin, UCLA, our local community college, that come in and act as judges. And every student has to present their work through public display. And it's set up in the process of how science research presentations are done in college. So they make research posters, which they then have up, and people come around and talk to them about, and they answer questions about. And these topics are, again, all chosen by students. So this is just an example of one. They were looking at the problem of single-use plastic packaging. So all of their problems have to be real world. They have to justify that it's a real problem, and they have to show a proof of concept that this problem could actually be addressed by their solution. And they do prototype testing and collect data and all these different things, as well as do research articles about that topic to delve into what have scientists already done. So it's a very intense project. This is their final exam. This is what we spend the entire last quarter working on, and we started in the beginning of the second semester. So it is definitely a key part of the class. I mentioned the STEM Club, and this is where we do outreach into our community. So one of the things that I believe Tyrone mentioned is the idea of making connections. And so this works in both directions. So trying to make connections to those that are above you, as well as giving back to those that are younger than you. So that is the mission of the STEM Club. We do community outreaches at local elementary schools, at boys and girls clubs. This was a partnership with a homeless shelter and a dog shelter that we worked with. This is at a local elementary school science night. This was actually at an LA STEAM conference 2 years ago, where we were asked to present for Hitachi. And so they have a range of different opportunities. And this club has engaged 650 elementary school students. We've participated in 15 local community events, had tons of guest speakers, and we visited 25, actually over 25 of our local elementary schools. So every year is different. This is a student-driven club. They are in charge of everything. I just sign off. And so it is a student-driven club that has a lot of different activities that change every year. So all of this that was built back starting in 2010 was just on my gut experience as a teacher. And it was nice to see in 2016 a report that came out about partnerships and equity. And these were sort of their, hey, these are the things that should be in place here if you are truly trying to go towards equity, and partnerships is a key part of it. And my smiley signs are next to the ones that I think, hey, we're doing a pretty darn good job on. Culturally responsive pedagogical practices, would not say at all that I am an expert in that, but we have worked really hard to engage our families and our local community members. We've worked very hard to make all the learning hands-on, which has been a challenge this year with distance learning. Research experiences are a must for the class. That's their research project. The idea of a supportive environment, it sounds silly, but those I Heart Nano shirts created a community of students, and these students they've talked to me about how they've made best friends through the class, how they've kept in touch over the years. Just, it is truly a community that continues on past high school. The idea of mentoring, there's lots of opportunities for students, not only to engage with mentors for themselves, but to be mentors for younger students. And it was one of my happiest moments when I had a student take the nano class and be like, Miss Duran, I've been waiting since 6th grade to take this class when you guys came to my school. And so this student remembered when we came to their school in 6th grade, and as a junior in high school, they were excited about an experience that they had back in 6th grade. So that was quite an exciting moment for me and for the club and for my students that have supported it. So these are the partners that I have built over the time. Some of them are local, some of them are not. So I already mentioned the California Nanosystems Institute at UCLA. Our local community college, College of the Canyons, they've been a great support. I've gotten involved with something called our local Santa Clarita Environmental Education Consortium, which is a nonprofit looking at supporting environmental education. And actually today, we just had a huge event called our Green STEM Summit, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, that went virtual and really extended what our reach has been. And I think we will continue to do it at least partially virtually in the upcoming years. The Materials Research Lab I mentioned as well with the RET, and they have some fantastic materials there as well for teachers and students. Hitachi has just started a remote SEM program, which I'm going to talk about as well. I've been helping them pilot that program so that students can actually run an SEM from their own computers at home, which was really fantastic. We tested that out last month. And then Lockheed Martin has been a wonderful support for engineering mentors for student projects, as well as for judging of our final presentations. So how did all this happen? And it did not happen overnight. It took a lot of patience, no fear, and tons of pictures. People love pictures of seeing students engaged. And I say start small, pun intended, because nano is a billionth of a meter. But that's really the way to start. That's how I started. I started off by just throwing in a lab that was a nanoscience lab in my biology class with freshmen and just seeing what happened. And so you can start really small with something like magic sand, which is super cheap. And this is a link that I'll give you later where you can buy it and kids love it. It's so engaging. Nitinol is another amazing material that is super, super cheap and you can buy, and it just wows kids. It gets them thinking and questioning, which is what we want for STEM careers. This is a super hydrophobic surface that can be made by students using one of the UCLA labs. And this is a bio-inspired design. So the idea of biomimicry and bio-inspired designs is something very important in the course. And it shows really the idea of how interdisciplinary solving real problems is. We use biology, chemistry, and physics. Whatever you need to solve the problem, that's what you use. Doesn't matter what we call it. And then actually this idea inspired some of my students to create a material called MPM. We had mudslides a few years back, you may remember, that were really shut down the 101 in Santa Barbara and the Montecito area. And it was a very intense time. And these students were really sympathetic and empathetic to that problem. They wanted to find a way to help. So they came in and they developed a material based on superhydrophobic concepts to help address mudslides. So I cannot emphasize enough that it's important to invite teachers, parents, administration, anyone in the world who will be interested in seeing what you're doing to promote your program. And don't be afraid of self-promotion. It took me a while to be comfortable with that because that's not really my personality, but it is really the only way to push your program forward and to network and to help create new resources for yourself and your students. So that said, where do you start? And literally go to Google and look at the maps and examine what's in your local community. What are the nonprofits around you? What universities do you have within a reasonable radius? What are your community colleges? What businesses related to STEM can you find? And go look at them. Google, find who they are, look at their websites, find their outreach, contact them, send emails, and just, don't be afraid to send lots and lots of emails. I copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste, and play the teacher card. People feel sorry for teachers. They're like, oh, poor you. Whenever they hear I teach high school, they're like, oh my God. And then when I say I teach chemistry, they're like, oh, and it's just, they want to help. People want to help. And so if you just reach out, you can make contacts, and you just start with one, and then you can build from there. And this really can help benefit your students in terms of connecting your classroom to the real world, which helps engage learners. Okay, and then just to take a quick me stop talking break. I don't know if anyone had any questions, but just to take a moment to take a breath and to say, hey, is there anything I've said so far that anyone has any questions about or comments? Love to hear them. And then I wanted to transition to a different mode of presentation, which, if you're interested in it, is how a lot of teachers are engaging students right now through distance learning. Distance learning is tough. And so any kind of tools we can use to engage students are super helpful. So I'm going to switch over to something called a Pear Deck, which you may or may not have heard of before. But it is a way to make slides interactive so that you can get feedback without having to do what I just did, which is throw out a question and have an awkward pause. Because students are nervous to unmute and participate. And sometimes they'll use the chat, which I welcome to use as well. But a Pear Deck forces them to respond to you and then records those responses. And at the end, sends your slide deck to those people. So it is a way to save what you've done and to communicate. So I've mentioned that there's a couple of resources, but I haven't given them to you. Well, because they'll be in the Pear Deck. So at the end, it'll get sent to you. So if you're interested in that, I would tell you to go to joinpd.com, and it will ask you for a code. So enter the code, and then it will show me if anyone connected. And then once I'm done with this, at the end, I'll click a button that sends what are called Pear Deck summaries to the email that you used to sign in. And so it gives you the whole slide deck. Again, this is a free resource. They do have a version that you can pay for that has got more bells and whistles. But right now they are being very generous with teachers about free trials. And then you can either choose to go back to basic or upgrade or ask for an extension if your district or school is not paying for it. Okay, so I can see down here that one person connected. And so that person will get access to those slides. Now, if I have students come late, which happens all the time, I don't want to have this sitting here, but I don't want them to be disengaged. So what's nice about this is it's, thank you, Karen, for joining. It gives you the code up here in the corner. So if you decide, hey, I do want to join this, this is the code to join. And so it's up there throughout the whole slide deck. All right, so we're going to continue forward. So I mentioned UCLA and the California Nanosystems Institute and their free labs. So this is something that is the kind of the first step if you're interested in getting kind of cutting edge technology to your students through labs, which I know obviously right now, most of us are not in a classroom with students. However, they are doing virtual trainings, and actually you're able to get materials to actually hand out to your students if you so choose, or you can keep them, and when we go back, you can use them as well. So this program is not only giving you free labs, but also access to experts in those areas. So these labs are developed by graduate students, and you get to hear a talk from a professor that is expertise in the field that professional development is on. So I helped run this professional development with UCLA. And then I just wanted to show you a quick student video that was made from the material that they made. So this is the super hydrophobic material. And these are my students. So you can also, and then of course they slow-moed it. And you can see how the water will literally just bounce right off. And if they didn't make a good surface, it sticks a little bit until a certain point at which something called the roll-off angle is exceeded, and then it ends up flying off. So this is a material that students made, and then they tested it. This is just water with food coloring in it. And they see that even though the surface is flat, the water can bounce off it. And at some point, even the part that they didn't cover with the coating properly, it will eventually roll off. And this is technology based on the lotus leaf. So it is a bio-inspired technology. And then there's another video of a surface that's not so great, but I don't need to show you that. I just wanted to give you a point of reference. So currently I'm working with UCSB on something that I've developed called the Science Learning Sequence, which is a way to structure distance learning. And when I return to my classroom, I actually plan to use it as well. And it is incorporating all these ideas of video phenomenon, graduate students, guided research, formative assessments, and this idea of student engagement through giving them learner agency. And I'll talk more about that as we move forward. So just to kind of run through real quick what this would look like. This is the structure that we use at the UCLA trainings that we can modify and give to students, that involves starting with some kind of phenomenon and working through multiple models of what you think that phenomenon is about. And so this is a link to this actual sheet. So you can click on it. It'll take you to the Google Doc version that you're welcome to use and make a copy of and modify. So I would show students this and say, hey guys, we're going to watch a video phenomenon or a demonstration if I were in class. And I want you to take some observations of it. And I want you to answer a few questions about it. So right now we're just in observation mode. So as an example, in one of my units, I start off with this video with the gecko. And it is an interesting video that I will fast forward to the interesting part, but just to give you a sense of what that would look like. So in terms of right here, so I would ask my students to make observations and to write a few questions.
มาไม่พอแม่พอกล้องมาโชว์เลยว่าโชว์หัวเมื่อกี้มุดหัวนี่กระดอง
I'm going to fast forward to the part like this.
หัวงูโอ้โหซูมหัวงูโหแจ๋วมากดูมันจะโอ้โหดูเลขอ้าว8ยัง8อยู่สงสัยวันนี้8จะเป็น1เลขไทยแล้วเนี่ยมันม้วนเหมือนนะ8จุด7 8จุดอ้าวแล้วหัวของเจ้าตัวนี้ไปไหนอ่ะก็ได้ไงก็เอางูทับอยู่นี่หัวตุ๊กแกงูไปเอาเลยสงสัยเว้ยอะไรจะปล่อยเอาดีขาเลยโอ้โหอย่างจริงเลยอ่ะช่วยเอาถอยก่อนโดนตัวหลับปะช่วยทำเลยว่ามันคืออะไรวะมันคงคุยกันดี มันติดต่อทางลมหายใจนี่รู้เพื่อนมันอยู่ในอันตราย
ทำอะไรกันสักทีดีไหมล่ะ
นี่เฮ้ยมันช่วย
And so then it goes on to where this goes on for a little bit, but you can imagine that students are like startled by this. And so they have no problem making some observations and asking some questions. And then after we share some of those out, they come back and now I ask them to come up with what do they think is happening? How is the gecko able to do what it's doing, which is walk on the wall and even attack something and not fall off? And so I emphasize trying to use any kind of vocabulary to draw whatever they need. Okay, so then after this, we go through and I mentioned to them, hey, can you think about maybe adding a zoom in bubble? Like, what do you think is going on at the micro scale? In other words, the scale you can't see. What are particles involved here? What's, tiny things do you think might be going on that could affect it? And they may not have a lot to say at this point, which is okay. And I let them know that. And then we do something. So this is an activity that I modified to do at home this year. It involves looking at forces and whatever they could find around their house, tape, Play-Doh, whatever had some sort of stickiness to it. And all they needed was a ruler and something that had an even amount of mass that they could look up, like pennies and a plastic bag. And so they set up this to see, at what point would the sticky thing fall down, and getting a sense of what is it like, how much force does it take for something to unstick? Since it's very difficult to measure how much is involved in something sticking. So this is sort of a simple entry level concept into looking at force and thinking about all the forces involved in anything that is sitting anywhere, sticking on a wall, standing up. And so it's a little physicsy, but it's actually really important and leads us into intermolecular forces. And so after we do some things with that, we come back and say, okay, what did you learn? What can you add to your model of the gecko? And then they've added some stuff. Hopefully now maybe they feel more comfortable with adding vocabulary. And then we come back and we do some more stuff that involves more group sense making. So maybe we have a guest speaker. Maybe I ask them to do an activity on a Jamboard, which we'll talk about in a second. I've created maybe some student slides, or maybe I have to do a little more hand-holding with teacher slides. Whiteboarding, so them trying to visualize what they think is going on. And they have had the opportunity to look up some things on the internet about geckos and to read different things and to try to figure out how are these geckos able to stick, and what does sticking and unsticking mean. And so after all of that, we come back and they do a final explanation about, hey, what's going on here? And hopefully at this point, they can actually give a good explanation that involves intermolecular forces, that involves the idea of balanced forces and nanostructures on the gecko's feet and some other things. So that's just sort of one mode of walking students through a project that could touch on a lot of different concepts. And again, at this point now, when we go back and ask them to do this, they're able to do this because they've learned about the tiny little nanostructures on the gecko's feet that allow them to have an enormous amount of van der Waals forces and actually stick to the wall with these electrostatic forces of interactions. So how does a graduate student fit into this? And this is what I'm currently working on, is recruiting grad students to make videos that are relevant to high school students. And so that's why I'm briefly going to talk about that, because this is a project I'm just starting. So we only completed one video and I actually have 4 more graduate students lined up. But the idea is that my goal is to build a library of diverse people working in STEM. So that idea of seeing self. And so, women, people that are not from this country, people of different ethnicities, and not to just be that traditional white guy with the glasses on. And so that's my goal. And to connect this to the science classroom, I'm using the cross-cutting concepts in NGSS so that this could apply and these videos could be used in any classroom, because cross-cutting concepts go through all levels from K-12. So how are these videos different than what you might just pull up on YouTube? Well, these have added value because I'm specifically working with the graduate students to frame their research in terms of cross-cutting concepts. And that the reason for this is to make it flexible and useful for all different grade levels. Also, I'm asking the students to relate to them as human beings, like to talk about their experiences, their failures, you know, the fact that they didn't just become a PhD grad student at UCLA magically, that they failed and they went through hard times and they found ways to push through. And also asking the graduate students to directly address the students and say, hey, what do you think? Or can you go out there and try this? Or to make it more interactive. And the idea is that students can begin to see themselves in positions like PhD candidates or professors in STEM or engineers. And so as I get those created, I will be adding them and hopefully having that library to share. So I mentioned the SEL at the beginning, and I've shown you a few different things like the stretching, the taking a break. Pear Deck also has some really cool things, like you may notice for those of you that are on Pear Deck, that you can actually do sliders, which kids love. So there's an icon you can drag. So if you do that, what happens is I see it on my screen as far as what someone said. And so if I can show those responses to students or I cannot show them. So if I go here, I can see live what's happening, and there would be multiple lines here with multiple people. So if I saw a bunch of lines for my students that are over here, then I might take a moment, oh shoot, you know, no one's learning right now because they're all freaking out. So we need to have a moment. So then I might decide from that feedback that I'm going to say, all right, guys, we all need to just take a sec and let's just color, because that's going to help my mind relax. And then I would give them 2 minutes to do this. And then I would showcase some of the cute drawings and just sort of give a moment for everyone to reset. That way they can actually focus and we can actually learn. Because when students are stressed and they're not going to focus and they're not going to learn a darn thing. So it's important to recognize that and to meet your students where they are. And that's the only way that they're going to learn, especially in what's going on right now. There's a lot of depression and anxiety, and I've been working with several of my students just this week. I've had 5 or 6 students email me and we've talked about things, and they are just really, really, really struggling. So it's very important to recognize where students are. NGSS is something that us high school teachers and below have been dealing with. So this is just sort of something that we talk about at the UCLA trainings, just to sort of emphasize the fact that where most people are not comfortable is the cross-cutting concepts. And those are really, really, really useful because they're big themes that can help you fit in content anywhere. And again, I'm just showing you that on your Pear Deck, you could set it up as a multiple choice to get feedback. I also want to mention there's some great websites for graphics that could be super helpful. Bozeman Science, and this is the link to it, has some fantastic graphic organizers for the SEPs, which could be super useful. So I wanted to share that resource. Also, they have some great graphics for looking at cross-cutting concepts. So these are the cross-cutting concepts. And so I would, ask my students to circle on the Pear Deck, what they think this activity is looking at, just to have them thinking about, hey, what are these larger themes? So these are just some resources to use. I mentioned earlier the idea of promoting learner agency, and there is a sort of a mantra that I really enjoy, and I learned from the grads educational program at UCLA, which is this idea of voice, choice, and public display or ownership. And I'd never given it words, but this is what I've been doing in my nano class, and I strive to do it in my regular classes, which is give students a voice and a choice in their learning, and then having some form of public display. And this actually is shown to promote learner agency. So this is sort of the guiding principle for my teaching. There is a Jamboard link, and this Jamboard takes you to this, which Jamboards are, kids love them. I've been using them a lot to help structure distance learning. And so you can post, you can set it up so students can post. And so I put a couple questions here. So if anyone wants to add to that, and there's my contact information, my email, and my LinkedIn. And so I can respond to these by just posting in a note, and it just makes it really easy and quick. And the feedback I've gotten from my students is they really like the Jamboards for collaboration. So here's another silly thing you can use just to sort of give kids a moment to stretch and think, where you're dragging some icons and thinking about that kind of thing. So these are the resources that I mentioned. We have UCLA link, the MRL link at UCSB, my personal website, something called Science News for Students, which is a fantastic resource for great science articles that have been adjusted to a point at which students can interpret them. And at the bottom, they have the citation for the actual scientific article where the information was given from. So you can start off with that easier, smaller chunk for students and then help them actually move toward looking at real scientific articles. Teachers, this is the NNCI. They have some great activities that are related not only to nanotechnology, but just to really interesting projects and ways to make things like maybe intermolecular forces a little more engaging for students. Omni Nano is a nonprofit that actually will have a guest speaker come to your classroom and talk about cutting edge technology, which is fantastic. Society for Science and the Public, they are a phenomenal resource. They do the science news. They also host teacher conferences. This just happened, and I happened to get lucky and win $1,000 in equipment for my students from attending this conference. So always look out for conferences. This is the program I mentioned through Hitachi, where you can actually have an engineer at Hitachi connect with your students virtually and give them the ability to control a remote SEM, a scanning electron microscope, which is really phenomenal. In the past, I've actually had this. This is my classroom. I've had this tool in my classroom. It's a $75,000 piece of equipment that Hitachi sends to schools for free. And it's amazing. And they've moved to remote because of COVID. So it's a really fantastic resource. Here are some student opportunities in terms of competition. There's something called the Biomimicry Youth Design Challenge, which is a fantastic experience for students. It can connect with biology, chemistry, physics, you name it, environmental science. And that is open to sign up for now. The Green STEM Summit is the local that has now turned virtual and actually national that just happened today that hopefully will happen again. And it was a fantastic like speed mentoring opportunity for students to learn about STEM. UCSB has something called the School for Scientific Thought, which again has gone virtual and allows students to interact with grad students in different areas of science. And then something called the Nanovation Competition through UCLA, which again gets kids to innovate and think about how to solve problems. And so that is not open yet, but you can use this link to find out more information about it. Okay, so I just wanted to acknowledge just some amazing people in these businesses and nonprofits and universities that have really made all that I do possible. Dr. Jamin Chen, who was the original coordinator at CNSI, Rita Blake and Elaine Morita also work with CNSI. They have been a fantastic support to my students and my program. Wendy and Frank are at UCSB, and again, great support. Kathy Flynn is the professor that I work with at our local community college. Michael Harrow is a fantastic engineer at Lockheed Martin who has helped me coordinate mentors for students. And Mario Quellar is in charge of the Hitachi SEM program. So these are amazing people that have helped support my students in their pursuit of STEM. So this is another little thing you can use with students to get feedback. You know, what is something you can use tomorrow? Maybe what was the least helpful today? And what would you like more information on? Students can draw or type things in, that sort of thing. And then, of course, I want to thank you for taking your valuable Saturday to listen to this. And just if you're on the Pear Deck, just a quick rating of where I am at and how I did, because I always like to get feedback so I can improve my skills and provide what people actually need. So thank you for your time. And I will go ahead and open it up to any questions or comments that you might have.
Can I ask a question? This is Ian Howarth, USC. I just wondered how many of the students that have gone through this nanoscience program actually end up doing at least an undergraduate major in a related field, and even maybe graduate work, or does their interest dwindle after they leave the program?
Well, it's difficult for me to get that data because once students leave, I other than, and that's actually why I started Facebook, keeping in touch with them to know what their progress are and to know how many. So I can only give you anecdotal evidence. I don't have the full data of that, but I can tell you that I've had students that took the class because they liked me as a chemistry teacher and had no intention of going into any kind of engineering field and or STEM field, and at the end say, you know, Ms. Duran, this change, I 100% am going to go major in this. And I've had every year I have students tell me that that because they didn't see themselves as someone who would be in this area, but then after going through the course and seeing what it really means to do STEM, they actually really like it and they want to do it. And so every year I have that, but I don't have the hard data to tell you percentage wise what that is.
Right. No, that's just interesting because we were talking earlier on about this is a great thing for getting people interested and get into actually a pretty high level. But then how do you keep that interest? How do you maintain that interest when there's also lots of other things to do as well? And obviously the students who do this kind of thing are good in general, you know, so they're capable of doing other things. And so we were just talking about that issue of, yes, get people interested at high school, but you've got to keep them interested in a STEM career. So this is great. Yeah. By the way, both of my sons graduated from Santa Monica High School. So.
Oh,
I think probably after you left, but
well, and as far as them keeping engaged, that's why I try to keep in touch with students, but it's kind of a self-selecting group. So the students that stay in touch with me tend to be the students that are going to stay in those fields anyways. So it's hard to say, but that's why I encourage them to come back as guest judges for the nanoscience presentations. I've had students that have started outreach programs at their colleges based on what we had done in the STEMS Club. So it's that whole idea of keeping them engaged that is what allows them to continue to be involved moving forward. And I've even had previous graduates come in as guest speakers. So I tell them, I'm like, listen, I want you to come in and share your experience with people who were where you were, 4 years ago. And so just sort of keeping that community, I think, is really important to keeping them interested and involved.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi, this is Karen Grothy. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you for following the Pear Deck.
I just was curious what it was. So I have a daughter-in-law who's teaching middle school, and I'm not sure whether she's using these same tools for her class. I might ask her if she knows about them, but I was wondering if the experiments you use in your class, if any of them are, or if there are any simple enough ones that could be used at like the 6th or 7th grade level that I could like point her to maybe.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that the UCLA program has done is done just that, moved from the high school format to looking at engaging junior high and even elementary school. So they have actually redesigned some of the experiments to be something that 6th graders can do or that junior high students can do. And in fact, we have every workshop that we do, we have a cohort of high school teachers, and then we always have several middle school teachers as well. So absolutely, if you look at the UCLA website, they definitely are geared towards, at the very least, junior high and perhaps even 6th grade. They have I think 2 experiments for that are geared toward that. And if you have any questions, there's contact information there. And if you can't get a hold of someone, just let me know and I will get on them and tell them.
That's really nice. So the other question is kind of the opposite end. I work at HRL Laboratories, which actually does some nanotechnology research. And I was wondering if you are looking for people who, like professionals who could talk to the class. Now, a lot of the people, they live all over Southern California, but the facility is actually located in Malibu. So, but I don't do nanotechnology myself, but I'm probably can find people who do. I was thinking I'd pass on some information to some managers I know, see if they know anybody who'd be interested in sharing with your students or.
Oh, that would be phenomenal. And actually, you know, it's funny because that's the trick with nano is it doesn't have to be specifically about nano because my students learn that everything is nano. Nano is just solving problems using technology is the way that I frame it for them. So I have guest speakers that are most people are not like there is no degree in, well, there is, but it's very only like at 3 colleges in all of the United States. But you don't have to hold a degree in nanoscience or be labeled a nanoscientist. If you're a chemist, a physics, an engineer, a designer, those are all key components to being able to solve problems. And that's really what the class is about. So yes, and please, that would be awesome. And
Okay.
actually the most important part is to be an engaging speaker and to have passion for what you've done. And COVID has allowed a lot of amazing opportunities. I've had a guest speaker every month. I've had a chemist, I've had a physicist, an engineer. And so none of them have that label nanoscience. And students really appreciate their time and are engaged by what they have to say.
Well, and nanoscience does cross a bunch of different fields because a lot of the material scientists are working at the nanoscale to like manipulate their materials, but also in the electronics field, as we look at making transistors and things, they're always trying to make those smaller too. So, you know, you've got different fields kind of looking at the nanoscale. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you very much. I will definitely take your contact information and feel free to pass my information along to anyone you think, or I can send you an email to forward to. Like I said, I've got tons of templates of emails that I just copy and paste whenever I see an opportunity for my students.
okay.
So thank you, Karen.
Yeah, this is really fantastic, really amazing, and a new approach. Yeah, definitely stay in touch. So our next speaker is here. So Daniella, you want to say a few final words to conclude your talk?
Yes. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I just, again, really appreciate everyone's time and really interesting conversations previously about what we can do to support students. And I think especially right now with just all that's going on in the world, I think looking for positive interactions for kids is really vital and keeping them engaged and not getting distressed or getting frustrated and seeing, you know, technology and STEM as really an opportunity to help better the world around them. And that's always the way that I phrase it. And if there's anything I can do to help anyone on the call in that endeavor, or as Karen said, you can help me, I would love to connect with you. And LinkedIn is great, or my email. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. Actually, our next speaker is we are Los Angeles Las Vegas chapter section, and Marty is